Today's episode is brought to you by LaRosse Media. They make professional videos to fit any budget. Check them out at larossemedia.com.
All right, welcome to the Stinking Albatross Podcast. My name is Alissa Golob, and I'm once again joined by my co-host, Scott Hayward. And today we have a very special guest for you for our interview show, Dr. Calum Miller. Now, for those of you who don't know, Dr. Miller is, he graduated from the University of Oxford Medical School in 2015 and works as a medical doctor, but he also teaches philosophy at the University of Oxford, where his research focuses on abortion policy and practice. So thank you, Dr. Miller, for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, I don't know about you, Scott, but Dr. Miller came on my radar last year when he did an interview with the BBC. Did you watch that?
Right, yeah. You know what? Yeah, I did watch that.
Okay, because it's definitely like one of the most memorable pro-life interviews I've ever seen. And I want to talk about that with you off the bat, Calum, because the interviewer was very antagonistic. She interrupted you multiple times. But the best part, in my opinion, was the end of the interview, because she was pressing him on the issue of rape and abortion, and he was saying that women are resilient and they have a strong ability to care for their children and to overcome these difficult situations. And she called him patronizing, and she asked, like, don't you think this is patronizing? And he said, I don't think it's patronizing to say that women are resilient. And that was the end of the interview. Very long, awkward pause, and then she cut it off. So was there more to that interview, Calum? Because I know in our experience, you know, they always edit our interviews like crazy. So was that the full interview?
Yeah, so this was a live interview, which are always much more daunting. And I actually thought I'd done terribly in that interview because, especially at the end, that final line, I kind of gave that response. I really had kind of, you know, I was kind of worried about what I was going to say because she was really kind of laying into me pretty aggressively. And I just thought kind of a straightforward, candid, kind of gentle response was the right thing to do, and just said, no, I don't think that. And she then basically shut down the interview and said, okay, and then moved on. And I thought that was kind of her feeling like she had like absolutely destroyed me, Ben Shapiro style. And so like I came away from that actually feeling terrible. And so I just kind of felt super low after that and really kind of demoralized. And then that was kind of the interview that really went viral more than any other interview that I'd done. Especially in Canada. Like most people in the UK have never seen it, but like everyone I meet in Canada has seen it. So I'm grateful for your for you guys who are watching that. But yeah, it was kind of a moment of real encouragement for me. That at the moment that I genuinely thought it was the worst interview on TV I'd ever done, and then it turned out to be one that I got kind of most kind of compliments for. Which obviously I'm not doing it for the compliments, but to know that you're being winsome and changing minds, hopefully, is obviously really encouraging. So yeah, it was a moment of real encouragement for me.
Yeah, I watched it again last night just as a refresher, and it just made me happy all over again. So thank you, thank you for that. Now, you've talked about going into medicine as a proudly radical left-winger who also happened to be pro-choice. So I guess my first question is, what made you change your views so dramatically?
Yeah, I guess I was definitely left wing and had very strong views on the environment, immigration, poverty, and kind of the things that many people typically associate with being left wing. And I still have those views. Like I'm very kind of left wing on all of those things. My views have changed a little bit, but I still think, you know, I still have a deep-rooted concern for the most vulnerable people in society, and insofar as it's sensible to do so and, you know, appropriate to do so, and I believe it often is, I think the government, as well as, you know, private entities, should step in and help the vulnerable, and that we have really serious obligations to people who are fleeing, you know, civil war or fleeing other difficult situations in their country, or for people who come from very poor countries where they're not able to earn much and who can earn a much more beneficial wage in the developed world so that they can support their families better. I think everyone should have those same opportunities. And so I still have those kind of views, and likewise on poverty and the environment and so on. Mm-hmm. So I was never kind of hardcore, kind of progressive in the way that kind of super far left people in Canada might be today. But I had strong and in some cases quite radical opinions on those sorts of issues, and I still do. I wasn't kind of a really hardcore far left abortion advocate. I just had the standard view that most people in the UK do, which is that early abortion is fine and late abortion is not really okay. And probably our current limit of 24 weeks up for abortion on demand is probably too high and should be reduced. And that's pretty much what almost everyone in the UK believes, and that's what I believed. And so it was really while I was at university, fortunately I went to a university where we were given the opportunity to think and reflect on difficult topics and given a kind of open space to debate freely on them. And so it was really that experience at Oxford that helped me to think about this issue and helped me to realise there are two sides to this, and actually the pro-life side might have something to say. And so kind of for a variety of reasons during my time at medical school, I gradually kind of came over to the pro-life side. It was kind of a mix of embryology that we learnt in first year, so that, when people said to me, this is just a clump of cells, this is not alive, this is not a human being, I kind of knew that was false because, I literally just did my first year of medicine and I passed it. And that was enough to know that that stuff is just complete nonsense. But of course, that doesn't solve the ethical question of, is this a person? Does it have human rights? And so on. And so really, I had a lot of debate to do with friends and colleagues about personhood, about what is it that gives humans value. And I came to be persuaded that being a human being is what gives us human rights, which sounds very simple when you think about it, but obviously is not widely recognized. Mm-hmm. So I came to see that all human beings are equal, regardless of how big they are, how dependent they are, regardless of how able they are to have a flourishing cognitive mental life and flourishing cognitive capacities. Regardless of anyone's abilities, we all have equal value. And that was something I was really persuaded by. And because that led to the pro-life view, I really couldn't deny it. I had to either give up human equality, or I had to give up basic scientific facts, which I couldn't really do at medical school, or I had to give up the kind of standard pro-choice position. And so I became pro-life. At the same time, of course, I saw the impact of abortion on women. I saw the reality of abortion, what it does to a child and what it does to a woman, very often subjecting her to significant trauma and actually not helping her. The evidence shows very clearly that for women with an unwanted pregnancy, there is no convincing evidence whatsoever in the world that having an abortion will alleviate any mental distress that she has. The evidence actually shows that she will be worse off if she has an abortion in that situation. And so I came to see that my concern for the vulnerable and my concern for human equality and human rights actually very naturally led to the pro-life view. So that's not to say that you have to be left-wing to be pro-life. It's not to say you have to be right-wing to be pro-life. Mm-hmm. But some of the concern for the vulnerable that I did have as part of my left-wing politics, and not necessarily monopolized by the left-wing, that really is what naturally led to my pro-life view. And so it was actually in that sense a very kind of natural fit for where I had come from.
So, Dr. Miller, I actually have a question for you, because you had stated that, when you were in Oxford, during your time in Oxford, you entered the school believing a certain thing, and then you exited the school believing a completely another thing. And I suppose, specifically for you, what was it at Oxford that precipitated this change in you? Was it, the material that was presented to you that you were reviewing during medical school? Was it the fact that Oxford, as you stated, the universities in the United Kingdom in general just allow for more of this kind of back and forth between people who have different views? Was there a pro-life club at the university that you engaged with or engaged with you? I guess I'm very curious, what was it at Oxford that allowed for you to go down to this pathway to become pro-life?
Yeah, it's a good question. So as I said, part of it is the medical stuff itself, learning the embryology, learning the psychiatric, effects of abortion, learning about the reality of abortion in obstetrics and prior to that and so on. So part of it was just the basic medical facts of the topic. There certainly is a good pro-life society, Oxford Students for Life. It's a wonderful society, but to my detriment, I never was very involved with it or didn't come into contact with it much at university, but it certainly exists and does some wonderful work. So it was really a mix of the medical facts and my reading and debating with people and my listening to the voices of women, not necessarily as part of my degree, but, as part of my clinical work and part of me being a human being in general. I would listen to women's stories and take them seriously as well. And coming to see that abortion isn't necessarily a tool of liberation for many women. And so one of the key things really is on that basic ethical question, debating human rights, human value, where do these come from, and what is it that makes us special as human beings? And that was really debating with kind of peers of mine, people in medicine and people in the philosophy department and in ethics, often the same age, who had different views. And just being able to have people there with different views and able to share those views really is what changed my mind. And you can see, therefore, why there is so much concern about, or why so many people don't like the idea of open debate and discussion at so many universities, particularly in North America. It's, I think, really because people are fearful of the truth, and they're fearful that if people actually have an open debate, they will change their minds and come to see the truth. And the truth, of course, is very frightening, but it's something that we have to confront, and I'm obviously very grateful that I had the chance to do so.
Now, you specialize in abortion policy and practice. So what countries have the most effective pro-life laws that have statistically decreased the abortion rate, in your opinion?
It's a good question. I suppose the basic answer is that we know for a fact that when a country protects the unborn child and their mother from abortion by prohibiting abortion, the abortion rate does decrease. And that's the single biggest thing that we know has a huge impact. Now, some people try and deny this, and frankly, it's pseudoscience and kind of fake news merchants that try to deny it, but unfortunately some of them have quite prominent platforms in academia. But the evidence is absolutely overwhelming that legal restrictions on abortion to protect the child and the mother are the most effective way to reduce abortion in most circumstances. It's not necessarily in every single circumstance, but as a general rule, pro-life laws work, and they work better than every other thing, or at least most other things that we're aware of. Mm-hmm. So countries that have those protections, whether they're in Africa, like Namibia or Egypt, whether they're in the Middle East, like Jordan, whether they're in Latin America, like Brazil, whether they're in Europe, like Malta and Poland. Each of these countries has slightly different laws, and some of them would allow abortion in some circumstances, but on the whole, they don't allow abortion in general. And their abortion rates generally are lower. And so, especially in Malta and Poland, for example, what we find is that when you have a country that has a good healthcare system and has laws which protect unborn children, they actually have incredibly good records when it comes to maternal health and when it comes to numbers of abortions. So both Malta and Poland have very low numbers of abortions, even when you take into account abortions done overseas or illegally. And they also have the best maternal health records in the world. Both of those countries have the lowest maternal mortality ratios in the world, joint with a couple of others. And so that also kind of shows that abortion is not needed for women's medical well-being. In fact, the opposite seems to be true, that when a country protects children and women from abortion, and when it does so in law, and when it has good healthcare, they actually become world leaders when it comes to maternal health.
Time to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere. We'll talk about Roe versus Wade with Dr. Calum Miller up next.
We live in a world that grows through communication.
Every connection comes from a dream to be heard and realized.
To welcome a better future. What are your dreams?
LaRosse Media will help communicate your vision through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Start building connections to your future audience. Visit larossemedia.com
and be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada from coast to coast to coast.
Okay, yeah, and we are back here with Dr. Calum Miller from the United Kingdom. Dr. Miller, thanks again for coming on our podcast this week to discuss, the latest issues of this week. One of which was, of course, this past Friday in the United States, the Supreme Court of the United States, and the Dobbs decision through Roe v. Wade. Now, we're here doing this podcast in Canada. You are physically here in Canada as we're doing this podcast, and you're from the United Kingdom. But I think it would be remiss of us if we didn't actually discuss this. And, we have friends in the United States in the pro-life movement. You have friends in the United States in the pro-life movement. What do you think will be the implications of this Dobbs decision, firstly in the United States, and then do you think it'll have any implications around the world, specifically in places like the United Kingdom and in Canada?
Yeah, I think obviously it has the biggest impact directly in the US, where already, I don't know exactly how many states, but a significant number of states have already banned abortion, either completely or with very few exceptions. And so obviously that would be hugely transforming in protecting so many babies' lives, protecting so many women from abortion, and being able to actually give them better alternatives and better options rather than feeling like they have to end the life of their child, which is what many of those women feel themselves forced into. So it's very exciting for the US. Of course, they still have a lot to do. There are half of the states at least which still have abortion all the way up until birth for any reason. And so there's still a huge amount of work to be done in the US, but it does allow many of those states to protect women and children, and to do so in a way that shows a message, and to do so in a way that shows how we can really look after both without abortion. And that's a wonderful opportunity that the world has never seen, because although the US or those states within the US are not the only countries to prohibit abortion, they are probably the only countries to prohibit abortion alongside having such an enormous pro-life movement that is able to provide so much practical support, so much political support for this movement and so on. And that really, I think, is quite a unique thing. And so it's exciting to see what comes of it. I think in terms of the rest of the world, obviously in Western countries, we've seen a big backlash. I'm sure all of us have seen in the media. I was in Ottawa the other day, and all these kind of Canadian people were shouting about how they were worried about losing their right to an abortion, which to me seemed a little bit fanciful, at least in the near term in Canada. They seem to be thinking that Justin Trudeau was imminently going to ban abortion because of the US Supreme Court decision. I don't think that's the case, sadly. But clearly it's prompted a backlash, and many of our politicians in Canada, the UK, in Australia, New Zealand, and in many Western European countries, there's a lot of talk about how can we protect so-called women's rights and, clamp down on pro-lifers and so on. And I think we're going to see a significant amount of censorship as a result, which is, of course, extremely worrying, given that we're supposed to live in liberal democracies. So on the other hand, I do think that this judgment shows to the rest of the world, which mostly is pro-life, that this is not simply a matter of becoming a wealthy nation and becoming a so-called developed nation and then introducing abortion. Now, the richest country in the world has shown and proven decisively that it is very much divided on this issue, that you can be an economically flourishing nation that is very highly educated and at the same time protect women and children. It shouldn't sound so counterintuitive. It shouldn't sound so controversial, but apparently it is controversial these days. So I think it's actually very encouraging in that sense, that although it won't have any direct impact in other countries, it will send a really strong message to pro-life countries that they are not alone, that they are not backwards, that they can actually uphold their pro-life laws protecting women and children, and at the same time develop economically and improve economically. One of the things I think that's most remarkable about the US is that despite being the wealthiest country in the world, they have one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the developing world. Yeah. They have their maternal mortality rate is equivalent to Moldova, which is the poorest country in Europe by quite some way. It is something like 6 times, or maybe even more than that, 6 times higher than the maternal mortality rate in Poland and Malta. And so I'm excited now to see how those pro-life states can really look after women genuinely and in a holistic way, in a way that doesn't include abortion, and so actually improve some of these terrible figures that the US has been fairly humiliated about for the last 50 years.
Now, one of the things that really excites me about you, Dr. Miller, is that you do some work with UK Right to Life, which is active politically in the United Kingdom in Westminster. And I think that's really exciting to me because a lot of times here in Canada, Canadian pro-lifers, whether they work full-time in the movement or they just happen to support the movement or volunteer in the movement, whatever have you, a lot of the focus is on the United States. And there are certain things, no doubt, that we as a movement here in Canada can learn from the United States and apply here. However, that being said, our systems are completely different. We don't have a presidency. We're not competing every 2 years for seats in the House of Representatives, and our version would be in the House of Commons. Our Senate is not elected, it is appointed. It is more similar to your upper house in Westminster, the House of Lords. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you on this podcast is, what does the pro-life movement look like in the United Kingdom? Kind of what is happening? What are you guys working on? Because I think that a far more kind of applicable, perhaps standard or a country that would be better for us Canadian pro-lifers to compare ourselves to would be across the pond in the United Kingdom, because we share a common monarch. We share the same Westminster parliamentary tradition. We have roughly kind of the same political parties and their structures and the same dynamics within those parties. So do you mind just delving a little bit into what does British pro-life politics look like today, and where do you think that'll be going in the, I guess, short, medium, and long term in your estimation?
Sure. So yeah, I should probably clarify at the start, I don't work for Right to Life UK, but I support them and obviously think they do wonderful work and keep very much up to date with it and try to help out and volunteer when I can. I think there's obviously a very hostile culture towards life in Western countries. And this is the same in the UK. It's same across much of Western Europe as it is in much of North America and particularly in Canada. I would say that our situations are probably quite similar, except if I may say so, that I think the UK has a stronger tradition of genuine liberal democracy and tolerance. So while both of our populations are generally pretty pro-choice and pro-lifers are a small minority in both and mostly lacking political power in Parliament, nevertheless, I think the UK at least has some basic kind of level of tolerance for disagreement and different views on these sorts of clearly important and difficult matters. Whereas some of the things I've seen in Canada have been pretty frightening, with attempts to clamp down on pro-lifers, either litigate or defund crisis pregnancy centres, or all the attacks that we've seen on crisis pregnancy centres and pro-life groups in Canada, or discrimination against pro-lifers in the summer programme a couple of years ago, and all of these things. Your audience will be much more familiar than I will be. I think in the UK there is obviously the attempt by far left extremists to do that sort of thing and to just censor pro-lifers and discriminate against them, but I think they are having a harder time because I think there is a more basic level of respect for free speech in the UK, or at least in the UK hierarchy. I'm sure most Canadians probably value free speech, but certainly your government doesn't seem to. And so I think that's probably one of the key differences. And so that, of course, gives me a great level of respect for Canadian pro-lifers, that they persist in what they're doing, even despite that added level of hostility. But I think there are always things that can be done. There are always improvements that can be made. So in the UK, we have had significant success with abortion pill reversal recently. This is a treatment that can be given in between a medical abortion, where in a medical abortion, normally someone would take the first pill and then 24 to 48 hours later, they take the second pill. But if you take progesterone in between and you don't take the second pill, the chance that the baby survives is significantly higher. And this, of course, is a life-saving option, not only for those children, but also for those women who immediately regret their abortions and desperately want some help. Now, it's not foolproof. It only increases the chance that the baby will survive, but it does do so. And many children have been born as a result, which has saved their lives and given their mother the most important thing in the world to them, their child. And so the media and various activist groups, including the chief activist group, the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, basically wrote to our General Medical Council complaining about these doctors who were giving this life-saving option, saying that it's not safe and it's not evidence-based and so on. So one of our brave doctors, Dr. Dermot Carney, took them to court and said this is baseless and it's irrational, and got expert witness saying so. And the GMC got their own expert witness on the topic, who also said there is evidence for it and it is safe. And there was nothing wrong with what these doctors are doing. They identified maybe some small issues, but they said fundamentally there is no problem with abortion pill reversal. It is safe, it is effective, and it should be available to women. And so all of the expert witnesses agreed. And as a result, we're now seeing the startup again of abortion pill reversal, only this time with the sort of endorsement of some pro-choice expert witnesses in the UK. And that will save not thousands of lives anytime soon, but it will save lives. And of course, to those babies born and to those mothers, that has made the world of difference. And so just fighting and being courageous in those sort of hostile circumstances can have an impact. We're also litigating in the courts at the moment, because our law says that you can have an abortion for any reason up until 24 weeks. But if the baby has a disability, no matter what the disability, whether it's anencephaly, where the brain doesn't fully develop, or whether it's cleft palate, whatever the disability, you can be aborted anytime up until birth. And this has been criticised by almost every disability rights group as clearly discriminatory, in the same way that sex-selective abortion up until birth would be discriminatory. And so we're taking that to the court, and we will see what happens. We don't know. But we are hopeful, because we've had very good media coverage on this, that people will come to recognise that this is discriminatory and hopefully change the law as a result and save, again, not most lives from abortion, but save some lives from abortion. And that, to those children, will mean everything. So we're not on the cusp, although the media seems to think we are, we're not on the cusp of banning abortion across the Western world, but we hope to do that long term. And if we give up now, we'll never do it. Whereas if we keep fighting now, even if it takes our grandchildren or our great-grandchildren to do it, we will be the foundation for doing so. So it's vitally important that we keep going in countries like ours, and that, you know, as the work that you're doing shows, that we keep active politically as well, to make sure there is a pro-life presence in Parliament, and that parliamentarians take those concerns seriously, because that does make a difference, and it does stem the tide, and it does save lives.
Now, you talked about Justin Trudeau, and in one sense, Boris Johnson is almost worse, because he said that, that reversing Roe versus Wade is a step backwards, which isn't that surprising given that he allegedly paid his mistress to have an abortion. So do you come into contact with a lot of politicians that think the issue is politically dead, that leaders are against you, that there's no way to move forward? Because sometimes in Canada we come across that even from pro-life politicians. And if you do come across that, what is your advice to these politicians who think that way?
Yeah, great question. I'm not going to get into a slanging match between who's worse out of Trudeau and Johnson, because I think they're both... You can tell what I think about both of them. I'm not a fan, we'll put it in a diplomatic English way. I think, for sure, we see all the time that abortion is the preserve of the powerful, and is often used by powerful people to hide their wrongdoing. And another good example... Our civil service fought very, very strongly to allow telemedicine abortion, where women get abortion pills through the post without ever seeing a healthcare professional. And we know there's a mountain of evidence showing that this puts them at risk for coerced abortion from abusers or sex traffickers. We know that it risks them having an ectopic pregnancy being undetected, and therefore rupturing and confusing those symptoms of a ruptured ectopic pregnancy with the abortion, and therefore not going to the hospital immediately, and therefore potentially dying as a result. And we've seen a variety, we've seen children giving birth to third trimester babies at home with no medical supervision, because they didn't have an ultrasound or even an examination to check how far along they were in the pregnancy. And so we've seen horror story after horror story from telemedicine abortion, but it was pushed, among others, by our civil service. And then, of course, we found out just a couple of weeks ago that one of, not someone working on this policy, but someone with a very senior role in the civil service, a powerful man in the UK, I think has been imprisoned now, actually, because he got abortion pills and he gave them to his, I think, mistress. At least he gave them to someone without her consent, and basically forced her to have an abortion without her consent. And this was someone in the civil service who, in another department, could have been responsible for setting this policy. And so we've seen that, abortion is really wielded by powerful people, and less regulation on abortion in particular is exploited by them. Now, to come back to your actual question on what can politicians do, I think there are a number of things you can do. It sounds like you have a lot of pro-life politicians in Canada. Obviously not the majority, but you do have a significant portion of the Conservative Party. I don't know if you have any in the other parties. We have a handful of pro-life politicians in the other parties in the UK. What I would say is that there are always things you can do. There are things that you can get common ground, even with pro-choice people on, such as sex-selective abortion. And we nearly passed a law a few years ago to ban sex-selective abortion. It was very close. And I think probably if we try to pass it now, it might well pass, even in a parliament that is overwhelmingly pro-choice. So there are things like that, which even if they don't pass, they still raise the issue and keep the issue alive. And politicians have an incredible platform to educate the public as well as to legislate. And I think that's just as important a part of what they do. I would say there are other things that you can do behind the scenes. You can speak to your fellow parliamentarians, both in your country and in other countries. You can encourage them, you can motivate them. You can tell them that this isn't a settled issue and that you would like to do something on this. You can work with hostile or pro-choice politicians on areas where you would have common ground, like preventing coerced abortions and so on. But you can also make small deals. I mean, it's no secret, I think, that in Parliament, people will kind of make deals on certain issues with other politicians. Even if you
really?
only,
I never heard of that before.
Even if you're a caucus of say 20 politicians, and I know you have far more than this in Canada, you're a caucus of 20 politicians. There are going to be some votes in Parliament where your 20 people are needed. And if you band together and say, okay, we will vote for your thing and give you the 20 votes you need if you give us some sort of concession elsewhere. It doesn't have to be a big concession. It's not banning abortion from conception, but give them a small concession on some other topic and use those numbers that you have in other areas in order for a concession on abortion on something that should be uncontroversial, like third trimester abortion or sex-selective abortion or coerced abortion, where pro-choicers kind of incredibly are still reluctant to act, even though, of course, coerced abortion is anti-life and anti-choice. So there are all sorts of things you can do, and I really do encourage you that you are not powerless just because most people disagree on the basic issue of abortion. You do have a platform to speak, you have connections to educate and lobby, and you have political influence where you can make those sorts of deals, and you can make that sort of make those sorts of initiatives come to fruition. So I would encourage you to do as much as you can. And if you're not sure what to do, please get in touch with your pro-life groups, because they will have ideas for you and would be more than happy to work with you on a strategic plan for those sorts of initiatives.
It's interesting you mentioned like having a small caucus that can wield a good amount of power within a parliament, and this is where the Westminster system really comes into its kind of full glory, so to speak. And having like a very small percentage of members of Parliament in the House of Commons or members of the Legislative Assembly in our provincial legislatures can really influence sometimes like who is the government. So, for example, in I believe it was 2017, the BC Liberal Party had won the most amount of seats in that election campaign. But they didn't win government because the NDP, while they won a few seats fewer, the Green Party had 3 seats and they were able to project them into government. And they didn't really use it properly, I would say, to get a good deal out of it. I think if I recall, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Miller, that there was a situation back I don't know, about maybe 5 years or so ago. You guys have had a number of elections in the last 10 years. So I can't quite recall if it were David Cameron or Theresa May or whoever was the Prime Minister at the time. But I think it was the Ulster Scots Party from Northern Ireland. Is it the DMP or something like that? I think they had 10 seats to keep the Conservatives in power. And I can't remember if it was assisted suicide or something like that. No, I think it was to make abortion legal in Northern Ireland, and they were able to wield their power in such a way in the House that they were able to keep that away, at least at that point in time. So I think it's really interesting that you bring that up. I also think it's interesting about finding the common grounds. You're talking about coerced abortion, you're talking about sex-selective abortion. It's almost as if you're reading the 4-point abortion policy from a Conservative Party of leadership candidate here in Canada, Dr. Leslyn Lewis. Like, these are things that she is talking about, and it's so interesting that she's bringing this discussion up. One of those, courageous members of Parliament women full of fortitude that are pro-life in the House of Commons, relatively new member of Parliament, mind you, and she is bringing these up, and yet these are discussions that sound like they've been had for at least a little bit of time across the pond in the United Kingdom. So I just find that to be a fascinating connection, and frankly to be a hopeful connection, because I think that allows for a pathway forward to at least start somewhere here in Canada, looking at a model, a government, like a government system that we share with our British cousins across the way. So I find that to be just a fascinating connection. Alissa, I don't know if you kind of your thoughts on that, but I appreciate you bringing that up, Dr. Miller. By the way, we didn't tell Dr. Miller to give that answer or anything like that. It's more than coincidental to me.
Absolutely. And one of the things I found interesting too is that you brought up the DIY abortions, and this was something that was introduced in Britain, I know, at the beginning of the pandemic, as was here in Canada, as a response to COVID-19, as a response to canceled abortion appointments and locking down of hospitals. So, you know, you did talk about that man in power who gave his girlfriend a DIY abortion without her knowing. From a medical standpoint, what are the dangers and risks associated with this practice, even with women who choose to do this at home and are coerced or pressured, like in that situation?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there are a number of risks, and I actually gave a presentation to our parliamentary kind of pro-life group on this specific question, which is available online. If you go to the Right to Life website and search my name, it will come up, and that will give you a bit more of the detail. I'd say the first risk, of course, is coercion. We know that on the website of at least one of our biggest abortion providers, Marie Stopes, named after the famous eugenicist, they've changed their name now to MSI, which is obviously stands for Marie Stopes International, though they forbid themselves from actually saying it. They say on their website, in their frequently asked questions, "I'm being pressured into an abortion. What do I do?" And they say, "Do not worry." I'm paraphrasing only very slightly. They say, "Do not worry. We will see you in person, in private, at the clinic, away from anyone who has accompanied you to the clinic, and we will not proceed unless we know you are certain of your decision." So, of course, the central thing that they reassured women about was that they would be seen in private. And, of course, this is impossible to ensure in the case of telemedicine abortion, where you speak over video or more usually even just over the telephone. You can't guarantee that they're alone and that it's really their decision. So they're promoting, in effect, coerced abortions, which are a grave human rights abuse and have the potential to destroy lives psychologically and through the trauma. The second thing, of course, is what I mentioned, where we don't know how far along the pregnancy is. We don't know how big the baby is. And therefore, you can get women or even children, as we've seen in the UK, delivering third-term babies at home without any medical supervision because they thought they were under 10 weeks. We have seen people who have ectopic pregnancies and they've had no ultrasound, so that when they take the abortion pills, they have pain and bleeding, which are the main symptoms of an ectopic pregnancy. They think it's just the abortion. That's what I should have expected from the abortion pills. They don't go to hospital until it's too late and they have liters of blood in their abdomen, nearly dying. We don't know if any women have died of this in the UK yet, but certainly it seems likely that they will at some point, and they certainly have done in other countries. So those are some of the medical issues, and there are more besides that. We know, for example, that at a certain stage in pregnancy, if you have a certain blood type in the rhesus kind of blood grouping, then you are at risk of having a sort of immunoconversion. It gets very complex. I won't explain it in detail, but essentially what can happen is that if you are not given the relevant antibody and you are of a certain blood type when you have an abortion, the baby that is aborted will have affected your body in such a way that the next time you have a baby, your body will attack those baby's blood cells and will cause hemolysis and will threaten the life of the baby and cause extraordinary medical problems. And of course, all that to say, if a woman is not seen in person, she won't necessarily have her blood group checked, she won't be given the antibody, and she won't be prepared for the next time she has a pregnancy, which could seriously endanger her future baby. And so there are a number of problems beside this, but those are just some of the issues that we've seen through DIY abortion. and actually the reason that many pro-choice secular medical authorities in the UK have objected to it. So our child safeguarding authorities in the NHS have said that telemedicine abortion is dangerous for children and should not be legal. Our Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health has said that telemedicine abortion for children is not safe, and both of them have supported amendments to the law saying that children should be protected from DIY. In those words, they've said that children should be protected from telemedicine abortion through law. And of course, the abortion activists and the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists has ignored them, has smeared them, has slandered them, pretending they are just pro-life activists and essentially putting women's health at risk as a result.
Time to take a quick break. More with Dr. Calum after this.
Nature communicates with us in a universal language. The sunrise starts a new day. The sunset marks our accomplishments.
The most beautiful communication is where the speaker and the listener match perfectly and understand the same message.
Your future audience is waiting to hear from you. What message do you need to share?
At LaRosse Media, we fashion beautiful communications through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Create your own most beautiful message. Visit larosmedia.com and be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada from coast to coast to coast.
All right, we are back here with Dr. Calum Miller. Some of our viewers and listeners may or may not recall the death of Sir David Amos, who was a Conservative member of Parliament in Westminster in the United Kingdom, who was murdered about a year or so ago, and a pro-life member of Parliament. And we're just wondering, Dr. Miller, did you know Sir David? And if so, what kind of man and what kind of MP was he?
Unfortunately, I didn't have the privilege of knowing Sir David Amos. I know that he was a great ally to the pro-life movement. He was a friend of the pro-life movement, and he voted in a way that was in accordance with his values. And so he was really treasured as a pro-life ally and as someone who really cared about unborn children and their mothers. But he was also, so widely respected by others as well. The media is not friendly to Conservative politicians in the UK, even if they're not pro-life. The media is pretty hostile to Conservative politicians. But David Amos was the prime target in a way. He was a Conservative, white male, older generation Catholic pro-lifer and a member of Parliament. So he was the kind of prime target for the media. But what people consistently said after he passed away was that he was such a wonderful person, a good person, and that whatever his disagreements on certain issues like abortion with the majority, he was always respectful and civil. And so it really was a shock to the country. Of course, you will always get fringe people who celebrate the death of other human beings, and I'm sure there were a few in the case of Sir David Amos. But actually, the majority, even of people who disagreed with him, had only very, very pleasant things to say about what a sincere, caring person he was. And that certainly seems to be true within his constituency as well. And as I say, he was a wonderful pro-lifer and an incredibly large loss that will be very difficult to fill in the pro-life movement. Sadly, his replacement, I don't think we know what their stance is on abortion, but there was obviously no attempt by the party to kind of value or kind of commemorate Sir David Amos's commitments to life as a result of him passing away. There was no attempt to kind of recognize the contributions he had made, sadly, but we do obviously miss his presence in Parliament and in the country, and yeah, his loss is deeply felt.
And, there's another interesting thing about the death of Sir David. Some people would call it, a borderline martyrdom of him, the murder of Sir David, is that while he was dying in the street, a nearby Catholic priest wanted to come and to offer and to confer extreme unction. That's our final sacrament as Catholics, known as commonly as last rites. And I believe it was the London Metropolitan Police that disallowed that priest for coming to do that for Sir David. And in the wake of his death, a piece of legislation, and I don't know if it was actually passed in Westminster or not, at least was introduced, that would make it so that if a Catholic is dying in the street of some sort of, terrible death, such as Sir David's, that a priest can come and to be able to confer extreme unction, those last rites, upon that dying Catholic in the street. And so even in his death, I would say at least some good came of it, at least from my perspective as a practicing Catholic.
Absolutely, yeah, and this was actually caused significant uproar in a sense, because I think there's just a general kind of religious illiteracy in the UK, that people just don't know the significance of religion to people's lives. And you might think, well, why is that bad? Because, why should everyone know about religion and how to respect certain religious beliefs? Well, our culture at the moment is built around people's self-identity and respecting that identity and cherishing and protecting the things that form that identity and are centrally important to them. And of course, for many people in Western countries, their faith is centrally important to them, is part of their identity to them, and it's profoundly important, therefore, that we have awareness of it and that we put in place policies and educate people on how to respect things that are centrally important to people. We might disagree, people can disagree with a religious stance, they might disagree with a gender identity, they might disagree in all sorts of ways, but we still have to have a basic level of respect and understanding of how we can show respect and dignity to people and their deeply held beliefs. And unfortunately, that's missing in a lot of the West. And so there's been a lot of cases where religious people have been, grossly violated and disrespected, mainly out of ignorance rather than anything. And so, of course, we welcome the legislation. I wouldn't be able to say I haven't followed it as closely as I should have done. I don't know whether it's passed yet, but certainly there has been legislation. And I think it was actually put forward by a Labour member of Parliament, which is generally the kind of far left socialists. One of them actually, a Catholic MP, and possibly actually pro-life, I can't remember. One of the Labour MPs, I think, put forward this legislation, which I thought was a really meaningful move and a rare display of kind of bipartisan friendship and respect, which I thought was really to be welcomed. So I'm grateful for that, and I'm obviously glad that, as you say, some good came of this horrendous event, that now there's a bit more understanding of what Catholics believe. I'm not one, but I think we should know about what Catholics believe, and I'm grateful that there has been that opportunity to make that clearer and hopefully prevent similar things from happening in future.
Mm-hmm. I mean, as a pro-lifer here in Canada, the news of his murder definitely shook me, because I had followed him for a while and knew that he was pro-life and outspoken, and even just as much as it shook me that a guy tried to murder Brett Kavanaugh in his home and his family. So these are the types of things that pro-life justices and politicians are facing at times, and maybe not specifically because they're pro-life, maybe sometimes they are, but it seems to be getting worse and worse. So hopefully that doesn't come here to Canada for sure. On a different note, I mean, you are a medical doctor, you're a professor at Oxford, and you're also obviously very outspoken on the abortion issue. My question to you is, how the heck aren't you canceled yet? Or fired, for that matter.
Yeah, I guess so. So the first thing I should do is clarify I'm not a professor at Oxford, because people on Twitter will immediately claim that I said this and things. So I should clarify I'm not a professor, but I teach at Oxford, and I'm a researcher at Oxford. I think, as I kind of suggested near the start, the UK does have more tolerance for free speech and for open debate than many parts of North America does, or do. I think, in particular, our government has at least tried in some respects to uphold that. So we actually have a bill going through at the moment. It might even have passed. I think it's passed all stages in the Commons, maybe not the Lords. And this bill basically is to protect academic freedom. It's to stop people getting cancelled. And part of the reason for this is because people are not just being cancelled for being pro-life. If they were, then probably the government would ignore it and not really care about free speech. But the government now does care slightly about free speech, because they know that anyone who is remotely conservative for any reason is getting cancelled. And they obviously need to kind of try and stop that happening. So I have a cynical kind of approach to it. I don't think our government really does believe in free speech, because they've been passing horrendous legislation about online speech and severely restricting the right to protest. So I think our government is mostly doing it as lip service at universities. But on the other hand, it's still welcome legislation that most people support. Most people are concerned about the lack of academic freedom at universities on a variety of issues, whether it's abortion, transgenderism, and that's partly because so many feminists in the UK oppose the transgender, kind of the radical parts of the transgender movement. As I say, conservatism generally, even if you're an economic conservative, you can probably get cancelled for that, and that's mostly what our Conservative Party is. So it's there are some protections in the UK, and the government has supported some of those, and certainly the UK people generally value freedom of speech. And I should actually credit Oxford itself, because I think even without that context, I think there are people at the top in Oxford, maybe not everyone, but certainly there are people at the top levels in Oxford who genuinely do value academic freedom, and as a voluntary personal commitment have done that when it was their decision. So I think that is to be commended and to be valued, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice. And so Oxford has been a good place to be for having genuine discussions about difficult issues. And so I'm grateful to have to be fortunate enough to be in that position.
Absolutely. That absolutely does not exist here in Canada. There was recently a teacher at an elementary school in a town in southwestern Ontario who just raised awareness about 2 books in an elementary school library about transgenderism, one about a 12-year-old taking puberty blockers, and another one of a 9-year-old who thought he was asexual because he didn't dream about girls in his classroom. And these were books in the public library, and she was fired immediately. There have been many instances of professors at U of T and other places that have spoken out against vaccine mandates in the last couple of years, just about mandates. And they have been fired. Dr. Jordan Peterson has been persecuted, obviously, famously, for opposing a radical sex ed agenda and using pronouns and all that kind of stuff here in Canada. So, I mean, I'm glad to hear that you have that freedom in the UK, and hopefully that does filter its way here, because it's getting pretty bad.
Okay, so Dr. Miller, thank you once again for coming on to our podcast. But before you go, there's something we like to do with our guests, and that is a series of rapid fire questions. So while the questions might be rapid fire, you don't necessarily have to give, those answers in a rapid fire way. But with the first question I just wanted to ask you here, and there's about 6 or 7 of them. A lot of people might not know, but you just got engaged, and we would like to know, how did you meet your fiance?
Great question. So we met at an event for young pro-lifers in Europe. So I obviously am very fond of my new fiance, and we're very excited to be getting married. She's also doing wonderful work on pro-life issues, on freedom, and supporting the human rights of the most vulnerable. So in that sense, we get along very well. We both care a lot about the most vulnerable people, whether it's babies in the womb, whether it's mothers forced into abortion, whether it's people being persecuted for their faith, whether it's people in poverty, and so on. And so we're delighted to be teaming up both personally and professionally to protect the most vulnerable.
Are you guys going to be the next British power couple?
They're like the pro-life Will and Kate right there.
I'm English and she's Scottish, so it's a particularly kind of nice team to bridge those divides and come together for a good cause.
Yeah,
right.
A truly united kingdom.
Yeah. Are you a soccer guy or a cricket guy?
I'm very much a soccer guy. In the UK, it's pretty much entirely determined by the school you went to. If you went to a private school, you're generally into cricket and rugby. If you go to a not very nice school, you like football, i.e. soccer. And I went to one of the worst schools in the country. So I love football. And I try to play as much as I can.
Do you have a favorite team?
Chelsea, of course. Who else is there?
Favorite politician, dead or alive, from any country?
I was going to say this would be really difficult because there are so many, well, I was going to say there are so many good ones. There are like 100 times more bad ones, but there are a lot of good ones from any country at any time. In Canada, of course, Leslyn, you know, we all love Leslyn. Please vote for her. We love Arnold Viersen as well. Arnold is doing some wonderful work protecting the vulnerable in both situations of sex trafficking and pro-life work. I would say in history, William Wilberforce is kind of the only answer, especially being an Englishman. To see someone who came from England and who did such incredible work for so many years against such hostility, you know, for so many years in his work as an MP, he was lambasted, ridiculed, targeted, slandered. And for most of his career, he was in the small minority, and it seemed like a marathon task to overturn the slave trade. And yet he did it, with the help of others, of course, but his perseverance, and many people don't know this, you know, it wasn't just that he did that. In addition to that, he did so many other things. He did incredible work all over the world. He set up countless charities, like even the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. It's kind of one of our main kind of charity, probably the main organization against animal cruelty in the UK. It turns out, and no one knows this, but it turns out Wilberforce was one of the founding members. He just did absolutely everything. And he really was, you know, I don't want to get into the whole kind of pro-life, whole life thing, because I think stopping babies from being killed is good, even if you do nothing else. But he really was like pro-life in absolutely everything, and really did show that you can be pro-life, very effective, a wonderful person that almost no one except the real ideologues could say anything bad about. He was so widely revered and respected, partly because he was just such a wonderful person that had his faith grounded in Jesus Christ, who transformed his life around the time of university, or maybe a bit later. I think it was later, actually. And just made him a person who loved people. And that was, you know, you read his biographies, it just comes across so clearly. People loved him because he loved them. And I think that's something we can all aspire to. So yeah, he's absolutely our hero.
Yeah, and you know what? That man, he easily could have been prime minister. He really, really could have, but you know, he chose a different path, a path based on principle. I mean, he worked on those issues for like what, 3 decades in the House, and eventually he was able to build his case and make some allies, some pretty powerful allies in government, in particular in the PIP governments. So he's definitely a model for any politician, really, any principled politician, most especially one in our Westminster parliamentary system. Yeah, I know these are supposed to be rapid fire questions, and I apologize, but you know, when Wilberforce comes up, I get a little excited.
I'll make an exception for him. Now, what's the most surprising thing about Canadians or Canada during your trip here?
Oh, wow. You've really put me on the spot there. I guess the stuff that's been most noticeable is stuff that I knew, so it wasn't a surprise. But it's still surprising in this way, in that like it's so different to Western Europe politically and socially. Like I knew this, but it's surprising to many people. So, for example, like the COVID stuff, you know, I have a moderate position on COVID. I'm fully vaccinated. I supported brief lockdowns. I support vaccination and encourage people to get vaccinated, but I also don't support mandatory vaccination. I don't think people should be fired for it. I think people should be able to debate where the virus came from, what is the best treatment, and so on. And I generally have a pretty mainstream view on what the best treatment is. I don't support the use of ivermectin, for example, but I think we should have a debate about that. And I think it's crazy that people were being cancelled literally just for trying to share an opinion on it, especially in some cases where those opinions turned out to be right, like probably where the virus came from. So all that to say, the reason I say all this is I have a fairly moderate position. I'm pro-vax, kind of pro partial and short lockdowns, but I also support free speech, and I don't support prolonged lockdowns. In the UK, it's pretty much that COVID is over. You don't really see people wearing masks or socially distancing anywhere. But COVID, you know, in the airports in Canada, it's almost like going back a year or two. It was actually surprising to me in that sense, and how politicized this debate has come. And likewise, just the kind of general hostility and kind of kind of madness. Like our country in the UK and in most of Western Europe has limits on abortion. Like most of Europe stops abortion after 12 weeks, sometimes 14 weeks. The UK is an outlier at 24 weeks, and Canada has abortion up to birth. Like, we think of, it's tempting for many people to think of Western Europe as kind of the home of progressive ideology in the future, and this is what we should be aspiring to. But actually, most people in Western Europe, including most liberal people and pro-choice people, kind of look over at North America and think some of the politics here is kind of deeply disturbing. So I'm sorry that wasn't a very nice thing to say that's surprising about Canada, but it is surprising to me that it is kind of so much more radical even than Western Europe. And on the other hand, you know, there are wonderful things about the country as well, and I hope to see more of it next time I'm here. And there are obviously some wonderful good people like yourselves who are fighting the good fight, and so yeah, I'm very grateful for that.
Look at that, Alissa. We're wonderful people, and it only took a guest from halfway around the world to come here to tell us that. So, Dr. Miller, who is the best and worst politician to work with in Westminster from a pro-life perspective that's currently sitting in Westminster?
Good question. So I should say I don't really work very closely with any. I like have passing kind of familiarity with some, and you know, some would know my name, but not many. I don't work very closely in the political space in England, so I can't say who's the best to work with from a kind of personal perspective, but I can say for sure, like, you know, we have wonderful champions of the cause for life, like Fiona Bruce, the MP for Congleton in the north of England. She has been just an absolute champion on pro-life issues, on religious freedom, and all sorts of issues, and indeed justice and, you know, economic justice and economic well-being for families that are in vulnerable situations. She's been a champion of developing government policy to help struggling families and to keep them together and give them the support that they need. So she has really been a champion. Carla Lockhart, an MP from Northern Ireland, is a wonderful champion as well. She, I think, chairs our pro-life group now, and she's really a wonderful person from Northern Ireland who is so passionate about this and really speaks wonderfully and is very, very committed to the cause. In the House of Lords, there are people like Lord Alton, who has been doing this for decades and is pretty much world famous for his pro-life work in the UK and all over, and has really been a human rights champion on pretty much every issue. You can't think of a human rights issue that he hasn't been involved in, and really championing the rights of the vulnerable. And also women like Philippa Stroud, also in the House of Lords, who's fairly new to the House of Lords, but has, ever since entering the House of Lords, has been consistently speaking up in favour of life, and also has been combining that with wonderful work in social justice at a think tank, where she has been really pioneering work protecting the most vulnerable economically and helping them to flourish and thrive and get back on their feet. And so all of these politicians have been wonderful champions of life, and also have been wonderful champions of the vulnerable and the marginalised more generally. So they've been great to work with. I won't name names for the worst. You can probably guess, like most of the Labour Party, like, and half the Conservative Party. Yeah, it's barely even party political. Like, most of the Labour Party will vote against banning sex-selective abortion. And I think, to me, if you vote against banning sex-selective abortion, i.e. you vote for sex-selective abortion, I just don't think you have any kind of moral authority or moral compass. It's really as simple as that. And that's the majority.
Do you hear that, Pierre Polivic?
That's the majority of our Labour Party, sadly. Not all of them, but the large majority. The large majority of our Liberal Democrats, and a good proportion of our Conservative Party as well. And so I think it just is... It's just so heinous and so anti-life and anti-choice and anti-woman that it really just is astonishing. I have no hesitation in saying that they are bad people with no moral backbone. Particularly chilling because some of these people claim to be Christians, and some of them claim to be, you know, supporters of the marginalised, and it really is just horrendous. So again, I won't name names, but if you look up or gendercide vote in the UK Parliament in, I think, 2017, you'll find a list, and I would say all of them.
What is your honest opinion of Meghan Markle?
So I don't know how she's perceived in North America. I get the impression she's probably more popular over here because they moved here, right? And it's a little bit woker over here. I don't, I'm not going to lay into her as if I know everything that she's done. Like, she's done irritating things, and most people in the UK think that. And I think she's really mistaken on some issues and has made, I think, some moral errors, has made some judgments in kind of morality in the way that she has sort of made things very difficult for the Queen, who we all know is a wonderful person. And that's not just patriotism. Like, the Queen is known to be just a blessed good person. I think Meghan has caused some problems for her, which I don't think were justified. She's kind of used her platform as a royal, and all the kind of platform and money that comes with that to promote some bad causes, like not so much public stuff on abortion, but certainly privately has been talking to people and promoting abortion and so on. So on the other hand, I don't know enough about her to say like she's a terrible person as a result. She might have made some mistakes that we all do. Maybe if it came to a vote in Parliament on sex-selective abortion, she'd surprise me and vote against it. I don't know. So yeah, she's not very well liked in the UK, and I think for like understandable reasons. Most people don't really like her or her husband. But I think it would probably be too far to say that she's just a terrible person. I think we don't have enough about her opinions or her actions to say that. It might just be some mistakes that we've all made, and obviously we should always have grace for that.
Well, I was very close to meeting her once because I lived in Toronto, which is where they filmed Suits forever and ever. And I actually walked past a filming once. So I don't know if she was there or not, but that was my chance encounter.
Look at that. Could have been an extra, could have had a completely different life, but here you are sitting with us. All right, final question, and I know this is a tough one, but British office or American office?
Okay, so this is particularly embarrassing because someone asked me this yesterday and I didn't get myself clued up since. And I've never seen either. So what I'll say is this. Unquestionably and probably not controversially, British humour is better than American humour. I don't think anyone can really dispute that. There are some exceptions. Dave Chappelle, we all love Dave Chappelle, and a few others, but generally British humor is better, except when it comes to TV shows. I really don't know. I don't know how many of your viewers know Impractical Jokers, but I'm quite a big fan of Impractical Jokers, and I think the US version, the American version, is a lot better than the UK version. So when it comes to some shows, the US is better for making me laugh. But yeah, I don't know about The Office. I'm very humiliated to say.
They always talk about Impractical Jokers on the Babylon Bee podcast. I don't know if you ever watch or
I didn't know
that.
That. I didn't know, but
I'm glad
they're fans.
Yeah.
Listen, I understand, you're a busy man. You have all these accomplishments, medical doctor, you teach at Oxford and whatnot. But I really do think that you're missing out. And these are two series, both the American and the British, that I think are really worth your time. Well, that ends all our rapid fire questions. I think you did very well, Dr. Miller. So, A+, and have a safe trip and enjoy living at Pearson Airport for a week.
Well, I'm so grateful for having had the chance to join you and to meet you a couple of days ago. So yeah, thank you for welcoming me to your country. Like I say, I hope to see more of it, and yeah, I hope to help the pro-life movement here especially. So key message, you can do stuff. I know it seems difficult and hostile, but you can always save lives and you can always encourage your politicians to do so, and they need it. So please do that political work. It is vitally important as well. And I'm not being paid by Scott and Alissa to say this, but I just genuinely think it's important. So yeah, thank you for your patience and for listening.
And where can people follow you, Doctor?
Yeah, good question. So
online, like social
media.
Yeah,
so I'm more active on Twitter than I used to be, and I've kind of really taken off on Twitter since Elon Musk, but I don't think that's because Twitter changed their policy. I think it just made me kind of more willing to use it. So if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can follow me at twitter.com/Dr. Calum Miller. That's CALUMMILLER, Dr. Calum Miller. And yeah, I'd love to see you there. I also have a blog, which is called calumsblog.com. And particularly I want to highlight there that we have a complete database on abortion. So any question you would want to ask about abortion, any challenge to the pro-life view, there will be an answer there on it. And it will have the latest academic evidence. It will be hopefully politely and, winsomely phrased. And it really is there as a resource for anyone to use for any question they get. There should be an answer on callumsblog.com in the abortion Q&A. So yeah, that's where you can find more about my work. And yeah.
Great. Well, I'm sure that our listeners will look you up. Definitely look up that interview on BBC. We'll repost it in our comments and in our link, depending on where you're listening to the podcast. So thank you so much for coming on. We really enjoyed our conversation, and we hope you have a safe and good flight.
Thank you. That's unlikely given given my experiences so far. But hopefully I will at least arrive home, and that would be, I guess, good enough given the circumstances. So thank you for having me on and for all you do.
Thanks for coming on. Thank you for watching. Follow our channel, like and subscribe, leave us a review on your favorite podcast app, and send us your comments at info@itstartsrightnow.ca.
Happy Dominion Day, happy Canada Day, and we'll see you all next week.